Welcome to the Life Self-Mastery Podcast, where we bring in entrepreneurs who have created online businesses and improved their lifestyles. Here's your host, Rohit Malhotra.
Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Life Self-Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Kartik Dabbiru, who is the founder and CEO of ComplyStream, an innovative regulatory tech startup venture which is dedicated to simplifying and unifying fragmented tools and compliance processes. He's been ex-product manager at BV, NK, Wise, and Leveris. Welcome to the show, Kartik.
Thank you so much, Rohit. Happy to be here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have been connected, but it's great to meet you in person. Before we talk about ComplyStream, I want to talk about how did you get your start in product management? And before that, we both are Indians. How did your childhood and your time in India start, which led you to where you are right now?
That's a great start, Rohit. And yeah, we have to go slightly back in time, not too long, but this was in 2007, 2008. I had my start already as a software engineer, and I was working with a number of teams from the UK and also the US. And every single day it was a similar story where I would be told, Kartik, do this, do that, and so on. And it was not my cup of tea to follow just instructions, because I would constantly be asking them questions as to, hey, why are we doing this? Why can't we do that? And the answer would always be, dude, just do what you're told. And that's what struck in my head. I was like, maybe I should go to the place where all of these instructions are coming from. Maybe that's where the answers are. And that's how the journey from Mumbai in 2008 started, where I landed. And this was actually September 2009. I landed from Mumbai in the sunny Glasgow. And that was like a massive jolt to the system, where on one hand, obviously you're just not used to the climate out here. And then suddenly you land up north in Glasgow to do my MBA. Okay. And that was my first foray and literally my first trip abroad, leaving the comfort of my home and so on. But I was like, hey, this is really where I think the answers are. Let me get done with my studies and then let's see what happens. MBA was pretty uneventful. I was more focused on speaking to a number of people and networking rather than the actual studies. At some point, I was like, is this even worth it? But then I got a chance to join JP Morgan as an intern, and they were giving me the option of, hey, maybe you join the Glasgow office. And I was like, no way, I want to stay in Glasgow anymore. And it had been like a good few months. Glasgow is a beautiful city, but the weather as such, I couldn't take it anymore. So moved to actually Bournemouth, and that was the summer of 2010, and I loved it. But then as the internship was coming to an end, I had already realized that the action actually happened all in London. Yeah. And somehow by convincing and like literally begging for a role, I got a job in London, JP Morgan. Nice. And that's really what I call in my life as the first pivot, like literally moving away from home, just trying to set up base here. I literally knew no one, barring a couple of friends that I made on the flight while coming to Glasgow.
Okay.
And that was in 2010. And since like almost spent good 9 years at JP Morgan, which was this amazing and still is this amazing institution that gives you this basics of, financial and like really payments and so on. But something was always missing. And I think it was back to where I was as, hey, where can I find the answers to the questions that I always had? And I realized like maybe a few years too late that, hey, if you really needed to get hold of those questions and like really go deeper into the problem and get closer to the customer, maybe JP Morgan is not the place for you. And again, that's purely my opinion. So I then moved on a quest to find the next step where I could get this option of getting closer to the customer. So I realized that maybe a bank is not where I need to go, but actually move to a FinTech. And that's how I made the move to FinTech. And this was in 2019, which is what I call as the second pivot. And once you join a FinTech from a bank, that's it. There's no going back, because you then get used to this fast pace, but more importantly, like really seeing your work turn into tangible benefits for directly the customers that you're trying to impact. Yeah, it's a bit of a, how should I say, a roller coaster of a journey, but I'm glad that I chose this journey. I wouldn't have it any other way.
So super interesting, because you've also worked with a lot of great fintech companies like Tide, BVNK. You also talk about JP Morgan. So how was the experience like? Because I think UK and Europe does have a lot of very interesting fintech startups. And what was some of the learning that you learned here, which you did not find elsewhere in other countries?
So I think one of the primary differences that I've seen, and again, this is, please take my India experience with a pinch of salt, because I barely spent a couple of years working there before moving to the UK.
Yeah.
I think the biggest differences that I saw was the focus on the why. And it's almost like, I think Simon Sinek, says this, right? Start with the why.
Yeah.
And that is almost like imbibed in my every fiber since the last 16, 17 years that I've been here. Is what is anything that you're doing, be it like a massive project, or it could be the littlest, like the email that you're writing, it is always back to that question as to why you're doing it, and also thinking about the who and the what and so on. So those are the expansion, how should I say, the expansion of thought that was almost curtailed quite proactively in India. But it was quite the opposite. That was almost like, given that, almost like it was encouraged to like, hey, be creative, think of like the why and who are you supporting and so on. However, there was a certain limitation that was placed, I would say, in a larger organization, because just by design, it's like so massive. There's so many people working at it, and the implications are so massive. Every little thing or every big thing was like split into those tiny slivers, and you only get access to that smallest possible piece. So even though you're constantly striving for the why and trying to understand who's getting impacted by the work that you're doing, you just wouldn't get visibility of that. But that's where the second difference comes, is when I joined the likes of Tide. So my first couple of months at Tide was almost like baptism by fire, because everything that I had learned as a ways of working at JP Morgan was almost put to a test. I say almost with a pinch of salt. It was put to a test, because it was like, one thing was very clear, that, hey, you do not have 6 months to build something, send it out, ship it, and then wait for some feedback. Maybe that comes a few months later, and then you realize you've actually built something no one wants. That cycle was almost, how should I say, was condensed from 6 months to, let's say, 6 days. And I think that's where the second biggest shift happened, was absolutely focusing on what is the smallest possible thing you can deliver to get any feedback from the customer. And the customer could be an external customer, internal customer, doesn't really matter, but it is always that focus on how soon can you get that iterative feedback. And that then brings me on to the third point. And someone said this to me the other day, and I loved it. I think at one of the podcasts I was listening to, perhaps even on Harry Stebbings, it was, hey, if you want, I'm kind of blanking on it just now. If you want creativity, then talk about it, something on those lines. But if you want clarity, then write. And that was really the thing that has stayed with me for the last several years in the fintech space, is active brainstorming without actually deep thinking about something is actually the worst possible thing you can do. In fact, taking the time, being really clear on what you want to do and why, and then actually taking it after you've written something, that's what then drives that clarity. So those are, I would say, the three kind of principles that have stayed with me, and I've learned this over the last several years. And I've also written a couple of blog posts on this, like the differences between when I moved from a JP Morgan to a small fintech like a Tide.
Yeah. No, I think that's super interesting. And we did talk about, I think, some of the blogging pieces we put it out on This Week in FinTech, and some of the common connections that we talked about. But you moved on. It's been a year since you started ComplyStream. But what led you to get into this crazy world of entrepreneurship? Why did you want to start ComplyStream, and what was the need for this approach towards post-event financial crime operations?
So I'll tell you a little story before we jump in to why ComplyStream and how and everything. And in fact, as we are speaking, literally, it's about exactly a year when I decided to start ComplyStream. Literally sat in this chair and the little story is I was absolutely convinced that I will never be a founder.
Okay.
And somehow along the way, I had made it up in my mind that, hey, yes, you have moved from a JP Morgan to a way smaller fintech, but this is perhaps really where the journey ends for you, because yes, some people might look at your career path and say, hey, you've gone from such a large organization to a fintech. Maybe the next step after this is you logically become a founder or entrepreneur, etc. I was like, no, that's not going to happen with me, because I'm just not that guy who has that muscle of taking that risk. I'm not resilient enough and so on. All the stories we tell ourselves because it's just comfortable to do that.
True.
But then everything changed in Feb 2024. So I was exiting my previous company, BVNK, which is this crypto startup. And a few years ago, I had spent a bunch of time working in financial crime, but predominantly onboarding for like small customers or individuals, mainly in the fintech space. And time again, I had come across this problem where financial crime, and especially operations in financial crime, was just so inefficient and so fragmented. And I was like, why is it that no one is, fixing it? And I was kind of on the receiving end of a number of these amazing regulatory tech startups who were pitching to me because I was the buyer persona. And every startup that I spoke to or rejected and so on, I was always looking for that one thing. And I would ask them this question saying that, hey, the capability that you have built looks amazing on paper, but have you really thought about this? Has an analyst ever said, give me one more tool that I can use?
Yeah.
And when like the compliance analysts, the onboarding analysts, I hold them quite dear to me because I've worked with them in the trenches. Fortunately or unfortunately, not as an analyst myself, but actually working as a product manager, really empathizing with their pain. And time again, they would just tell me this, that wish there was something that could like really give them all of the capabilities in one single place. And it didn't have to be so archaic, so clunky, and like really messy to use and so on. And that's really where, that's the thread that, stuck with me for a very long time. And until a few years ago, I came across this problem where we had this massive customer who was threatening to leave us, to leave the business I was part of, because of this exact issue, where payments were getting stuck, onboarding was taking probably a quarter to onboard customers and so on. And yet somehow the business was like, operating and so on without really thinking of how do we fix it from first principles. And the thing that we would always do was throw more people at that problem.
Yeah.
And that's what then gave me this idea for, hey, what if there is a way of actually fixing this where you start with the problem and you focus on the two personas that are impacted the most. Number one is your compliance analyst, who are inundated by these 7 or 8 different applications. On top of that, they have to use emails, spreadsheets, and SharePoints. How do you then actually build something that takes care of all of these platforms and also takes care of these 3 additional tools? You then look at the second persona, which is the customer, who's extremely frustrated by the slowness of the process, the inefficiency, and like the overall customer experience is extremely shoddy. So back to the story, we had the customer threatening to leave us. I was able to build like what I call as like the first perhaps version ever of some tool that was actually able to connect these two personas together, and the results were incredible. Number one, the customer became best friend of mine, and he was like, hey, can you do more of these things? And at the same time, they started giving us 3 times the payment volumes. The other user persona, which was inundated by these payment cases, these onboarding cases, they were able to manage 3 to 4 times the volume. But the last one, which I call as the North Star for ComplyStream from a product point of view, is that time to decision. So the time to decision really dropped by 95%. And I was like, hang on a second. If building this small capability gave me this massive impact, what if this is a real problem? And how about I turn this and I commoditize this and actually start selling it to other customers? And is this a real problem even? So that led me to leave my previous company, and Feb 2024, that's where the quest started to like really find customers and ask them that, hey, if I built this, would you pay for it? So yeah, that's kind of the journey started. A quick shout out to I just want to, for your listeners, ComplyStream, just wanted to give like a couple of words. So ComplyStream is this AI enabled regulatory tech platform that simplifies financial crime operations. We have 3 main themes or pillars on which the business is being built. Number 1, faster communication. Number 2 are your workflow and the rules that helps in really expediting these cases and generally operations. And number 3 is this decision augmentation piece, which comes back to our North Star, is enabling the analyst to make that decision way more quickly.
Got it. Super interesting. And I recently reached out to you because you came out of stealth. You talked about your funding, but you now transition to become like the founder, the CEO. But you're looking to hire people, but also you've raised funding. So what are some of the biggest hurdles that you raised in the pre-funding phase, and how did you go on overcoming them?
Yes. So I think the pre-funding phase, in a way, I look quite fondly on it because you literally had no pressure that was put on you. Yeah. And again, it's not the case that investors are putting pressure on us or nothing like that, but it's that psychological pressure that you put on yourself. But in the pre-funding phase, all ComplyStream was, at least in the very early days, it was a Confluence document that I had written about. Probably it was a 7-minute read, as I famously tell the people who are joining us and so on. But it was just my, distillation of the way I saw the financial crime operations problem and what we might want to do with it. I would then take that PDF, maybe summarize it and so on, and literally start talking to prospects. And it was essentially my network. And I would ask them that, hey, do you think this is a problem? And the first few prospects that I spoke to, predominantly my friends and friends of friends who had never heard of me, their response was, where have you been all our lives? And some of them even went to the extent of saying, hey, when can we integrate with your platform? And I would be like, there's no platform. All it is, this is a pitch deck that is there. And they would be like, hey, come back to us when you have something ready. That then prompted me to say, hey, maybe I should actually get something built, even a Figma prototype. So went to a friend of mine in India, got like a small prototype built out, literally paid probably $250 or something like that. And the prototype wasn't great, but it did the job. And it like really helped me with the next phase of discussions. So I would take that prototype, I would show it to as many people as I could, and they would start giving me like loads of feedback on the things that need to be done and so on. And it came to a point where people were like, you know what, this is great, but can we actually get something that we can touch and feel, we can play around with and so on. So that's what got me thinking that I was like, maybe I should actually build a live prototype. So went to a friend of a friend, and that's how we got like a smallish prototype design. The UX was pretty bad, etc., but it kind of did the job. And around this time, it was possibly maybe August timeframe, so a good few months into the journey. And we had like probably 4 months into the journey, and we had this prototype with us.
And obviously I want to follow up on this because now you have tools like Cursor, Lovable, Replit.
Of course.
So, I've been on the revenue side of the business. Do you think, because, all sales, marketing guys are thinking like we can't build products. But do you think with Cursor being like one of the fastest growing companies with getting to $100 million, do you think there'll be an explosion of products going forward? Or do you think, it's a good way to, create a prototype and, like you don't have to create a PRD, but you can use it and show it across. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
We actively use a number of these tools. So Vercel, Supabase, V0, V0 predominantly by Vercel. We haven't yet tried Lovable, but I think that's what is next on our bucket list. Bolt is something that we actively try. I'm completely with the direction in which it is going, where a lot of the acceleration in getting products built and shipped, that timeline is going to has incredibly shrinked. Yeah. So for example, we don't do any more PRDs, and this is coming from a product guy who loves his PRDs and so on. But my co-founder Sandy, he is full on builds out prototypes. He did a hackathon by himself over 48 hours. He literally built out the entire almost like a mock version of ComplyStream. All we then needed to do was literally start looking at how do we take all of the APIs and then start connecting the front end with the back end. So it really makes the journey of developing products and shipping products a lot more easier. I don't think we are absolutely at that stage where you don't need engineers.
Yeah.
And I don't think that will ever be the case. We will still need amazing engineers. But I was literally reading on LinkedIn this morning, someone talking about it is these elite engineers who will still be in demand. It's the middle layer of engineers or junior engineers that will no longer be the case. Either you will not have any junior engineers because they would have themselves turned into founders. So it now becomes that case of how deep an appreciation you have of the problem and the customer, and how amazing are your prompt engineering skills. That's what it boils down to now. It's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I believe in this revolution.
Correct. And ComplyStream unifies workflows and data to streamline investigation. So how does this integration, help financial institutions, manage post-event fraud even more effectively?
Yes. So going to almost at a bare bones level, let's talk about, what we even mean by post-event.
Yeah.
So if you look at a typical financial crime investigations life cycle, we like to think of it in two big buckets. One is a pre-event and other is a post-event. An event can be categorized as anything that is, let's say, a financial crime risk event happening. It could be, let's say, money laundering risk has happened, or sanctions hit, and those kind of things. Or it can be as simple as someone typed in the wrong IBAN details and payment is stuck because of that. So we treat an event as an exception, something out of the ordinary. Now, most of the regulatory tech space, and if you speak to VCs, and this was kind of our problem as well when we were pitching to VCs, was the regulatory tech space, they would say, is extremely noisy, it's too crowded, stay away from it, and so on. The answer, I would say, is somewhat true, because you need to look at the nuances. So the pre-event space is extremely crowded because you have a number of these amazing players who are trying to prevent these events from happening, prevent what we call as false positives.
Yeah.
And the nature of the industry that is, 90% of these events that happen are false positives. Where ComplyStream comes from is really that post-event. So we are likened to the incident.io, but for financial crime operations. So as soon as an event happens, ComplyStream picks it up and does everything required to really enable the financial crime analyst to make that decision much more quickly. And how we do this is by pulling three main data sets, I would say. Your customer, your payment, and the event information. And then we use AI, essentially language models, to enhance those data sets and really give a clearer picture to the analyst so they don't have to run around and go through these scattered go through the scattered data, these fragmented systems, and all of these inefficient workflows and so on before they can actually make sense of it. So we also say this: the current operational setup is that of a low context and high effort. ComplyStream is trying to turn it on its head and say it's a high context and a low effort setup, because we integrate with all of these pre-event players, or at least we are trying to, but also we integrate with the customer's CRM, be it their Slack, be it their emails, etc., and get the financial institution to a place where they become extremely efficient with their operations. So the direct benefit that we give to these financial institutions and predominantly payment services providers is we target their OPEX and we really bring their OPEX cost. And as a general principle of the industry, 30 to 50% of the OPEX cost goes towards financial crime. So that is where the biggest opportunity lies, and no one really has looked at it at the level at which we are looking right now. And just to also add, if you zoom out, the problem is extremely massive.
True.
And if you just take payments alone, 1 billion payments get stopped every single year.
No.
And it's kind of the industry default that they say 15 to 20% of all payments get stopped. Now imagine this, right? Those 20% payments getting stopped, 90% should not have been stopped. And that is really where ComplyStream is coming, is recognizing all of these, what we call as noise coming from all of these different systems, but actually separating the signal from the noise. And that's what will help financial institutions reduce their OPEX by becoming extremely efficient.
Got it. And you mentioned about AI. So how do you see the AI evolving in this financial crime investigations?
That's a crucial question. So we are firm believers in human in the loop, or what we call as human AI partnership. We don't think we will replace humans, but in fact, it is about enabling the human analyst to make those decisions much more quickly and much more accurately. And how we do it is essentially AI slash, as we are building these agentic workflows and so on, the idea is the agent does the repetitive tasks, if you may. For example, if you need to get more information about a particular customer, you would go on to, let's say, a public source or a private source. You would extract that information. You would then perhaps summarize it manually and so on. You might then realize, hey, you need more information. Then you might go back. Maybe you might go to a customer or ask internally and so on. So what we see this as almost like a sequence that is repeated, and almost to the tune of 85 to 90% of the job is really looking at these repetitive tasks, which are pretty frustrating if you ask from a analyst point of view, that you are at the mercy of whatever information is available, either in the public sources, or you reach out to a customer and they are already angry with you and they are like, hey, we don't want to share this information. So what if you actually have an agent do all of this, bring together, summarize this information, and then what you do is you really leave the decision making to the analyst. And you give your recommendations. Like the model will say, hey, I'm not going to make the decision for you, but it's actually you, the analyst, who has to make that decision. So a way of looking at it is really, if you're cutting out 80 to 90% of these repetitive tasks, what it really means for the analyst is they can then perhaps do 8 to 9 times the number of tasks that they are picking on, because these are higher order work, which then also brings them more satisfaction in their day-to-day. So that's kind of our thesis of looking at AI.
Super interesting. And, obviously, since I've come to Europe, there's been a lot of discussions about, people building startups from UK or Europe versus US. But obviously, London is such an interesting city, because I still feel it's still one of the, top 3 or top 5 startup ecosystems. But since you're operating out of London, how do you feel about the regulatory landscapes, and how does the market differ from, Europe and US when it comes to, FinTech startup like yours?
That's a great one. We have, I think what I've seen is, especially with London predominantly, is the focus on the payments and like how can you retain all of the connections to still keep London as the financial powerhouse of the world. Even though, yes, we have lost some of it thanks to Brexit and so on, but I've seen that there is still this optimism in trying to, hey, give that support to these smaller businesses. And even if a lot of the initiatives that were taken, by the previous governments and so on, or, the kind of decisions made during the pandemic, some of them did fail, but it still shows the mindset that, hey, we don't want to accept the status quo, and we want to actually try out new things and so on. But it is also marred with the fact that it is just not enough. So if you look at the US, VC ecosystem or the payments or the FinTech ecosystem, the pace at which they move is completely different. So I was talking, and I haven't had the pleasure yet to embrace the US VC or the FinTech ecosystem just yet. But what I've seen is the founders that operate or live and operate in the US, the mindset of thinking is completely different. I think the bets that they are making are far more bullish compared to the bets that the UK founders, or compared to me even. That is where I see that difference, where even talking to VCs and like going at funding and so on, the speed is completely different, or at least that's the perception I've been given. we spent, decent amount of time doing our raise and so on. But we have almost been led to believe that, hey, maybe you could have done this in maybe less than half the time. Again, I don't know how true that is. It could be a perception play, but obviously with Trump coming to power and the Labour government coming to power, I think it remains to be seen. But what I've seen, like with us at least, we've been given, the amount of support that we've been given in the UK ecosystem. Honestly, that's something that I had not expected. So I'm going to be on the optimistic side.
Got it. So interesting. And, you're still in the early days in building a startup, but what are some of the metrics that you look at when, your team looks at how the platform is working, and especially when it comes to impact on fraud investigation, and even, what are some of the KPIs and metrics that you do look at right now?
So as a business, our fundamental driver is the return on investment.
Yeah.
For any financial institution, a payment service provider, or a bank that is partnering with us, is like looking at, hey, what is the return that you get, especially on the OPEX spend that we are saving you and so on. So one of the big metrics that we really look at is the amount of time that you have really saved for an analyst or a group of analysts. And like, what does that really translate to in terms of, hey, have they been able to achieve at least, let's say, 3x the capacity? So that's one of the metrics that we look at. The other metric is really what we look at in terms of the customer experience that we have actually brought about for these two personas that I was saying. One, the analyst, and the other is the end customer.
Yeah.
So the NPS, the Net Promoter Score, as long as we are keeping it above 7 or 8, that's what would then mean that the experience that our customer is able to provide to their customer is actually going to be, that of a delightful experience. That delight then actually turns into revenue that our customer could have otherwise not gained because of a really poor experience and so on. So for us, those are the three metrics that we look at. One is the return on investment and the capacity that we are bringing. Number two is really the Net Promoter Score, both from a analyst and a end customer point of view. And number three is really the revenue unlock that you can bring by using ComplyStream.
Got interesting. And you since you're the founder, you're also responsible for getting talent into your team. But especially since you become the founder and CEO, what qualities are you looking for people who are going to join your team? Because it could be a very specific niche, which is financial crime compliance. But and how do you think and envision about building your team? Since a lot of people are talking about you could build a $10 or $100 million business with just 10 or 15 employees. I don't know how soon we can get there. I think Cursor has already achieved it, and a lot of new startups are. But what are you looking for when you're looking for hiring new hires?
I love that question, and so pertinent.
Yeah.
I also want to, before I answer those questions, I also want to mention that we are looking for our founding CTO. So
nice.
If any of the listeners, you are an aspiring CTO, or you are a CTO who would love to work at the cutting edge of innovation, then please do reach out. So before I answer the question around the kind of people that we are looking at, the other bit that you mentioned around the likes of Cursor and so on, and if we can actually build that $1 billion business with let's say 2 or 3 people, I'm absolutely bullish on that bet. I think, yes, it is possible. Even if that is not possible, at least what we have seen in our business is we are less than 6 people business, and we have already grown leaps and bounds since the last few months.
Yeah,
it's all possible because it's not just the no-code tools, but it's also the general purpose AI that really brings you that productivity gains that almost gives you those almost a person and a half kind of a capacity.
True.
Coming to the kind of people that would really work well in the kind of very small stage or early stage setup that we have is the number one driver, I would say, is your mindset.
Yeah.
Like, and this is something that you really cannot teach anyone, but it is about, do you have it in you to like really push hard even when like everything is against you? Can you push yourself hard to really break those doors open and actually make things happen, rather than waiting either on me or someone else in the business to actually tell what needs to be done? And we've had, this amazing team that we have built. Every single one of them is perhaps equally as driven or perhaps more driven than me to really see that problem being solved bit by bit. And again, the problem we are up against is a massive one. Will take a good few years before we actually say we are somewhat happy with the way we have solved it. But it is that resilience and that focus of like, can we solve this problem? And that we will not rest until it is solved to some degree. And that is really what we are looking for, is no one will be there to like, how should I say, chase things or say this is what you need to do and so on. Of course, we will give that direction and so on, but it's ultimately you as to how driven you are to take it forward. And that's what becomes the differentiator between someone, who we onboard or don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to startups, you got to take that initiative and you got to drive it, especially really in the early days. And with ComplyStream, security and compliance both are important. But how do you strike that balance between creating a very secure platform and also ensure that it's user friendly for your customers?
Yes. So I like the way you've framed this question.
Yeah.
I don't see this as a balance or a trade-off. I actually see this as they go hand in hand. And I think for us, security and resilience of the platform, it's a given. It's almost, I shouldn't say almost, it is table stakes. So any situation that we are in as we are building this platform, security and compliance is the first thing that we think of. But at the same time, because we are a company that is extremely focused on the problem and the customer, we always start with, is there a desperate problem that our customer is trying to solve, and really start there. And that automatically imbibes in the experience of the product. And what we are doing now is we have an amazing designer who's joined us. He's ex-Monzo, and he's been with us probably 6 weeks now, and he's already made a huge difference to the business. And the way the website looks, the app looks, is like completely unrecognizable in the most amazing way. So whilst our designer is talking to customers and prospects day in and out and really understanding, hey, what are you trying to do with the app? How can we make it more user-friendly and so on? We have our engineers, we have me and my co-founder constantly thinking about, hey, because this is, we are selling to a regulated institution, we always think of like, what is that smallest possible thing that could perhaps act as a deterrent, because the regulated institution might pick on it and say, hey, we need to have data masking capabilities, or we need to abide by GDPR, or we need to have the SOC 2 certificate and so on. So we preempt those things already. So on one side, you have our designer building these amazing UX and so on. On the other side, we are embedding all of the security and compliance angle to it. And also, I think, because we come from this background as, ex-product managers, ex-engineers from the financial services space, we know that things can absolutely break if even the smallest possible thing went wrong in terms of security or regulation.
Mm. Got it. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, I always feel like product managers are like the CEOs, and they do have that upper edge over growth and sales guys. But what advice you would give to people who or entrepreneurs who are looking to innovate into this highly regulated fintech space? Should they work in a fintech company, or how should they go about thinking how to solve that problem?
I love that question. And short answer is yes. Based off my own experience, I would thoroughly recommend aspiring product managers or even product managers in financial institutions, larger financial institutions, to like really try their hand at fintech. And I think the number, maybe there are three aspects to this that I would like to kind of uncover here. Number one is really, how excited do you get by speed?
Yeah.
And given the stage of the business we are at, and perhaps even when we grow big and etc., I think speed will always be that number one differentiator. So if you're someone who's aspiring to get into fintech, I think the one angle or one factor that you need to over index on, I would say, is speed. And what I mean by that is like really building that smallest possible thing, or it could be even, we talked about these no-code tools, Cursor, etc., building out those prototypes and really bringing your vision to life, like visualizing how you have understood the problem and how would you like really want it to be solved. The second thing I would say is that nothing can really replace that deep thinking and appreciation, either of the problem or of the customer, ideally both of them. But it's one of those things where you always want to keep going back to the why. And someone mentioned this to me, that it's almost like you have to keep asking why almost 5 times, because that's what then starts getting you closer to what we call as first principles. And again, for us, and for me, for the longest possible time, first principles always seemed, and perhaps still is, this elusive space that you want to get to, because automatically as humans we always default to thinking in analogies, and you almost try to compare something and that's how you go. But first principles really forces you to get to the ground truth. So as an aspiring product manager, or even any other profession, if you want to do really, really well, you want to get closer to that problem or that ground truth. The third thing I would mention is really that of transparency, and especially in communication. And this is something that I learned perhaps the hard way. In JP Morgan or larger institutions, I've seen where there is a lot of impetus placed on perfection. Like, can you build that perfect product, or can you build that perfect PowerPoint? But switching to this very small institution, perfection is almost like the enemy of progress. I'm just not saying that hey, build anything and just throw it out in the face of the customer. Of course, approach it with that deep appreciation of the problem, but actually go really, really fast and get something out there, and like be really transparent about, hey, this is what we are trying to do, this is where we think we are going, but not actually wait for it to be the most perfect thing. So those, I would say, are the three factors. So speed, and getting something built, and like really transparency / don't wait for things to be perfect.
Correct. And obviously, I don't want to talk about like a 10-year vision because, a lot of things could change. But in short term and long term, what are some of the ways in which you're looking to do those product enhancement? Any development that you're excited about the next couple of months or years from now?
Extremely excited about 2025, and I cannot believe we are towards the end of Feb already.
Yeah.
Where have the 2 months gone? But I think it's one of those side effects of speed and predominantly velocity. So at ComplyStream, we are looking at 2025 as the year where, number one, we have like really announced ourselves to the world. We are getting, so much love and support that is like, pouring in from all quarters, which is really incredible. But the second thing I would say is we are looking at it as the year where we experiment and like really double down on solving the problems that our customers really said, hey, this is a deep pain point. Can you please solve it for us? And like really going back to fundamentals is we'll continue to build really, really fast, but absolutely contradictory to, the age old what Facebook said, build fast and break things. We are completely that's an antithesis to us. Yes, we will build fast, but we will not break things. We really actually build something that will actually have a lasting impression. And number three is really doubling down on the power of AI, especially Gen AI and the agentic workflows. And that's really where we want to start seeing the real world impact of AI, to see it with our own eyes. And yeah, that's really where we think we are going. And yeah, every day that we spend working with our customers, working with our team, it's like you are uncovering one more truth, getting closer and closer to the direction that we like really wanted to go.
Correct. Absolutely. These are really exciting times, and congrats on all the success. I just quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
Yes. So top of mind is Measure What Matters.
Yeah.
And this was a book that I keep going back to. It is all about, OKRs. So
Yeah.
it was written by this amazing gentleman, John Doerr, who was, I think he was ex-Intel and then spent a bunch of time in Google, but that's where he really got these OKRs concept and so on.
Yeah.
I love that book. Keep going back to it. And it also is in line with, the mental model that I have around keep going back to the why and so on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's also one of my favorite books. I'll put that in the show notes. It's still early days, but if you could go back in time when you started ComplyStream, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done things differently?
I would go faster. So for me, I spent some time like really building out the 7-minute read on Confluence and so on. I would perhaps like really cut it short and perhaps start using a Lovable or a Cursor and really brought these prototypes to life rather than waiting on a design team in India or waiting on my ex-colleagues and best friends to like build the tool. I would have actually perhaps gone way sooner. But other than that, I wouldn't change a thing.
Correct. And do you have any favorite online tool, for example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom, anything other than ComplyStream?
So I love HubSpot, and I love the integration with Clay. So Clay is my new favorite.
Nice.
And me coming from, a non-sales background, Clay and HubSpot just make they just take the pressure out of like really, thinking about business development, the cold outreach to customers, which, me like everyone else, I would dread the cold outreach. But this is something that is, part and parcel of like really selling the vision, selling the product, and so on. So yeah, HubSpot and Clay are my top two, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love these tools. Great to hear from a product guy about Clay. And that's what got me smiling, but we'll put that in the show notes. Kartik, what's the best way people can reach out to you and know more about ComplyStream?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Kartik Dabbiru. I am also on, feel free to reach out to me on mail, kartik@complystream.com to know more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Put that in the show notes, Kartik. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Life Self-Mastery podcast, where we teach you how to start and grow your online business. For more information, visit Rohit's blog at www.lifeselfmastery.com.